Hi everyone, today we are going to look at coordination and response. Let's look at this picture. Now let me ask you, how do you make movement and how do you coordinate your body movement so that you are able to make the precise movement? Now, so your answer could be this, am I right? Nervous system. It is the nervous system that gives the instruction to your body, to your muscles, that enables you to move. So what is our nervous system actually? What makes up the nervous system? Perhaps we should look at this mind map. Now there are two parts of system in our nervous system. The first one is the central nervous system and the second one is the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is there to support the central nervous system. Now in the central nervous system, we have the brain and the spinal cord. Now, if you look at the brain, the brain can be divided into a few parts. Now, the first part, which is also the biggest part in our brain, now it is the cerebrum. Cerebrum controls the voluntary actions, the actions that are controlled by your will. Now, for example, the movement of your fingers. And then what about the hypothalamus? Hypothalamus is situated below the thalamus. Now, hypothalamus is a busybody in our body because it is involved in regulation. Now, anything that happens to the body temperature, the change in the body temperature or the change in the osmotic pressure will be under the control of hypothalamus. Then what about the thalamus? Now, thalamus is above hypothalamus. Now, so it is this part. Now, we know that any impulses from the eyes, okay, be them from the eyes, from the nose, or from the skin, from the hands, from the legs, will pass through the spinal cord to the thalamus. Here the thalamus got to make a decision. Now if it is related to visual, perhaps the impulses should go to this side. Now if it is related to, let's say, audio, perhaps it should go to this side. If it is related to memory, and then perhaps it will go to maybe the hippocampus. Now what about the cerebrum? Now cerebrum is also known as the hindbrain. It is situated posterior to the cerebrum, behind cerebrum. Now what does it do? It controls the body balance. So if you want to make a body movement, so of course the impulses are still from the cerebrum, but the impulses will be modified by the cerebrum first before they are transmitted to the skeletal muscles in your legs, in your hands, so that you are able to make that precise movement. Then what about medulla oblongata? Now if you look at it carefully, now this is spinal cord. The medulla oblongata is actually above it. It is involved in involuntary actions such as digestion, such as heartbeat, such as sneezing. Alright, so this is the central nervous system. And what about the other component of central nervous system, the spinal cord? Now look at this diagram. It is the cross section of a spinal cord. Now this side is actually nearer to our back. It faces the sky. Imagine that we were a four-legged animal. Alright, so this part actually faces the sky, while the ventral side faces the ground. And there are two roots leading to the central part of our spinal cord. And this root, since it is nearer to the dorsal side, so we call it a dorsal. This is a dorsal root. And on the other hand, we have the ventral root. Now the roots are the places where neurons are housed. So at this site, at the dorsal root, you see that there is actually a part which is swollen, and this has a name, ganglion. Now why it swells? It is because this is a place where we will be able to see the cell body of this neuron. Now the neuron which is colored in red is actually the afferent neuron. Afferent neuron is also known as the sensory neuron, because sensory neuron transmit the impulses from the receptor to the spinal cord. Alright, now so let's recall, ganglion is a swollen part on the dorsal root because it houses the cell body of the afferent neuron, also known as sensory neuron. Then let's examine the central part. Now the spinal cord can be divided into two regions. Now the inner region is known as the gray matter because it appears grayish, to our naked eyes. Then the outer region is known as the white matter. Now the reason the gray matter is grayish is because it houses a lot of cell body. Now as you can see here, you have the cell body of interneuron. Now the blue neuron here is known as interneuron, and the green one, if you look at it, the green one is efferent neuron, also known as the motor neuron, because motor neuron transmit the impulses to the effector, to the skeletal muscle, for example, to make work. Now since the gray matter houses quite a large number of cell body here, the cell body is actually the part with the nucleus of the neuron. Then you have the nucleus, you have the mitochondria in it, so that's why it is optically denser and it appears to be darker, yeah, to our naked eyes. Then of course the outer region is white because it mainly composed of cholesterol along this fiber. Now these are the nerve fibers. You will be able to see coatings of cholesterol. So cholesterol is transparent. So that's why their outer part, the outer region, appears to be whitish to us. All right. Now, so we have finished discussing about the central nervous system. Now let's move on. Move back. Now to our chart here. Now the next phase is how. So in this phase, we are going to look at how nervous system works. So first of all, we must have the stimulus, and the stimulus has to be detected by the specific receptors. If you don't have that specific receptors, most likely you won't be able to detect that stimulus. And then the receptors will trigger impulses. Impulses are then transmitted to the integrating center. Now in our body, of course, it will be the brain and the spinal cord that integrates the information and make decision about the action, okay, the action to be done. Now the impulses are then transmitted to the effectors. In our body, there are two groups of effectors here. The first one are the skeletal muscles. Okay, muscles can be skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, or the cardiac muscle. And the second one is of course gland. Now the gland is going to secretion. So responses are finally done, and the responses must be appropriate to the stimulus. Now what do I mean by responses must be appropriate to a stimulus? Now let's say if you see a stone is moving towards your head. So are you going to hit the stone with your head, or are you going to avoid the stone? Definitely you are going to avoid it. So this is what I meant by an appropriate response is triggered, all right, towards a stimulus. Now, so what are the example of stimulus then? Now look at this chart then. Now look at it. This is the main idea of coordination and responses. Whenever, now in examination, whenever you heard of this term, coordination and responses, or homeostasis, or regulation, or coordination, now remember, this is the main idea. This is the main framework. It must start with stimulus and end with response. Then we will start to ask, what are the stimuli that we are able to detect? Now, the stimuli are divided into two big groups. We have the external stimuli and the internal stimuli. Now we have learned all these stimuli in Form 2. Now, so for example, we have the eyes to detect the light, we have the ears to detect the sound, the skin to detect the touch and the pressure together with pain, and then we have the taste, okay, no, we have the tongue to detect the chemicals, okay, chemicals, and the nose also to detect the chemicals. Then what about the internal stimuli? Now, of course, remember I told you about hypothalamus, the busybody just now. The hypothalamus is going to take care of the osmotic pressure. Now, what is osmotic pressure? Osmotic pressure is basically the concentration of H2O and the concentration of salts, chemicals in our body. Then temperature, body temperature is something to be maintained as well. So any changes to the body temperature must be detected by the receptor, so that we are able to make adjustment and maintain the body temperature. Then what about these two? The partial pressure of oxygen and CO2. They must also be kept at a constant or within a narrow range. So that because if the concentration of CO2 in the blood increases, it might decrease the pH, the blood pH, which will instead affect affect the enzymatic reaction. Now look at A, blood glucose level. Now this is of course very important. Whenever you feel hungry, now it is because your blood glucose level drops. Now it is important to maintain the blood glucose level so that because we need glucose, okay, for the cellular activity. So if we do not have the raw material to carry out cellular respiration, so active transport cannot be carried out. Now transmission of nerve impulses also cannot be carried out. You can't even move, you can't even breathe, because all these processes require energy. Now, any changes to the stimulus will be detected by receptor. So to light we have photoreceptor, to chemicals we have chemoreceptor, to pressure we have stretch receptor, to body temperature we have thermoreceptor. Alright, then the receptor triggers the impulses to be transmitted to the integrating center via afferent neuron. And then after that, after integration of information by the brain and the spinal cord, then impulses are transmitted again via afferent neuron to the effectors. There are two types of effectors in our body, muscles and glands. They are going to carry out the job to bring about the response. Now the response, why do we respond to all these changes in the stimulus? It is because we want to protect ourselves from danger, because we need to adjust to the changes in the external environment. So if you see danger, most likely you want to run away from it. If you see food, of course you need to go and grab the food. Then if the temperature, the surrounding temperature is too hot, so we are going to find a shady area. And lastly, to enable us to live in a wide range of habitat, we need to regulate the internal environment. If you are able to keep your body temperature constant, then you can live in temperate region, you can live in a tropical region. Yeah, it is okay because you can still maintain your internal environment. Now lastly, what if something goes wrong with your nervous system? So are you able to detect a stimulus? The answer is no. Are you able to see the world? The answer is no. Do you feel hungry? The answer is no. Since you don't feel hungry, do you coordinate your muscle movement? Yeah, so that you go and find food, you digest the food? Certainly no. So basically, if without the nervous system, basically we can't function. All right. Thank you so much. See you again.